Okay, welcome back. Let's finally jump into Automation Builder. So I'm going to come down here and click on my ABB icon, and I'm going to take this lecture to walk you through some of the nuances of ladder diagrams in this environment. There are some strange little things that are going to trip you up if I don't, and that's okay. We're going to get through it. But, you're going to definitely have a couple of headaches along the way. You're going to see that ABB is a very vanilla development environment as opposed to something like RS Logix or CCW. So there's going to be some limitations which force us into workarounds. But, that's okay. Figuring those out is a constant part of programming. You're always going to have to work around something. Anyway, let's go ahead and get into a new project. I'm going to take a 500 project, and I'll just call this demo because this isn't anything I'm actually going to save and make available later on. This is just going to be a junk file more than anything. So let's come over here, select a processor, and then we'll come back over here and double click on application to get in our CodeSys environment. And once that pops up, then we know we're going to be working in ladders. So we'll go ahead and create a ladder program. Let's right click on this and add an object. We want program selected here, LD selected here, and I will call this LD1 to make it simple and hit OK. So now I've actually got my ladder environment in front of us, and I'm going to double click on this blue bar right here just to maximize that. And, right away you're seeing that there's some differences. You've got this var thing up here. You've got variable space, which shows you your variables while you're actually programming. That's pretty convenient. Down here, you've got a rung, and we're going to see that those aren't called rungs anymore. Now those are called networks. Whenever I want to add more lines, more rungs, now I have to come up here and click one of these two buttons. Network before or network after, and I can create more networks. Okay, so a rung is no longer a rung. It's called ladder diagrams, and you would think the lines were rungs, but no, they're actually networks, so it's a strange kind of ladder. Anyway, let's move on in this toolbar up here, and right away we've got a couple of really familiar things. Here's our XIC and here's our XIO, only now they're called contact and contact negated. Fortunately, we recognize the icons, so we already know how those work. Next to that, we have parallel contact and parallel contact negated. Okay, this is where things just don't really make sense why they set it up this way. Whenever we want to create a branch, we're used to just clicking a branch button and there's a branch, and then we can move controls into that as we see fit. Here, you don't have that option. So let's pretend you've got a contact here, and then you say, I want to branch around this. Well, then you come over here and you click this parallel contact, and that's what actually creates your branch. Once you're inside of there, then you can go ahead and you can create some other contacts, or you could even create another branch below that. But there isn't a way just to go and create an empty branch. That's okay. It's kind of a strange little paradigm here, but it still gets the job done. Now, once you've got this, of course, you can come up here and you could hit, there's a shortcut F2 or function F2, and this gives you a menu that you can come into to choose your variables. Or you can just start typing your variables. So for instance, let's say here I want to create a variable called hold in, and I'll just type hold underscore in and hit enter. And as soon as I do, here comes a declare variable menu popping up, which is very handy. It tries to guess what the type is going to be, and that's just perfect. I can go ahead and hit OK, and just like that, I've already got my variable set. Then once I already have variables inside of my database and I say, you know what, I want to get to that one variable, but I don't want to have to dig through a menu. I can just type a couple of letters like HO and then hit Control, hold down Control and hit the space bar, and it comes up with an autocomplete menu, and from there I can scroll up or down, but it happens to be right where I want it. So then I can just hit enter a couple of times. Bang, just like that, I've got the value locked in. So that's useful to know. Coming back up to the menu, this is going to look familiar right away. Coil, we already know what that terminology means. That's our OTE, that's our simple contact. Then we've also got two more to the right, set coil and reset coil. And you've probably already figured out that's going to be our OTL and our OTU respectively. Moving to the right is where things start to get a little more interesting. Now we have our function block, which is going to just create a dumb block that we can then choose what type it's going to be and set that up. Next to that, we have something called box with EN, or enable, or energize. I'm not sure which that means, but they're all the same, so it's going to work fine either way. The strange thing is, this is called a function block and this is called a box, but these are really the same thing. Now there's one difference, and I'm going to show you what that is here in a second. First, let me show you some familiar function blocks, and then I'm going to show you some things that are just going to kind of be annoying. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click on function block. And right away we've got this pop-up menu which looks confusing and intimidating. Well, we can see that, we've got some choices in here, but we have to dig through all these corny menus and expand all these things to try to find, there's our PID, and, we've got a ramp, and, we've got some other things. Wow, that's kind of annoying. Don't worry. You can come down here and uncheck structure, and you just get a simple, basic, alphabetically organized list of all of you got your standard function blocks. You can go to your user-defined function blocks, the things that we actually create to customize this program. We've got standard programs, and then we've got our user-defined programs, which is where you'd find like LD1 and then our initial program file that we start with. So it's nice to know that the reason that this is all set up like this is we can create our own libraries of function blocks and import them into this environment. And even though it's very vanilla and you're going to find that it's lacking a lot of functionality, that's okay because we can really blow it up and make this thing great. So for now, let's come back in here, and now we've got to an alphabetical list, and that's good, but we've also got a downside. Some of the things that we want to use and we use every day are named just really bizarre things. So, we have to come in here and figure out some things. Like, for instance, if you want a one-shot, that's pretty basic tech right there. You've always got to use one-shots. Well, in here, they're not called one-shots. It's called R_trig, R_trig, which means rising trigger. So, okay, the name makes sense, but, who decided to call this thing R_trig? Regardless, looking at it, you know how it works. We've got a momentary signal to the left, and then we're going to have a single scan energized bit over here to the right, so we can one-shot something. So what else have we got? Let's come back up here and click on function block again. And here's something really common. We want to scale an analog signal coming in. But when we come down here to S, you're going to see there's nothing called scale. That's okay. It's called lin trafo, LIN_TRAFO, which is somehow an abbreviation for linear transform. So transform magically became trafo. Okay, that works. As long as it's in there, we're good. So when I create that, now I'm going to show you one other little nuance to this. You can see we've got our input minimum, input maximum. That would be our 0 to 16383 traditionally. Our output min and max, that would be the working range of our sensor, what it's detecting, whether it's 0 to 5 psi or 0 to 100%, whatever. And then we've got the output value over here. But, this is really bizarre. Our input value and our output value are parallel with the ladder. So how do you put values in there? And the answer is, well, you can't. So what good is this linear transform if you can't send it an analog value and you can't get one out? Well, you can, but you have to create this block differently for it to work. So instead of coming up here and clicking on function block, we need to come up here and click on box with enable. And when we do that, let me click on somewhere that it'll allow me to. There we go. We get an AND box that pops up over here. Well, then we can rename that to LIN, and I'm going to use my control spacebar shortcut and hit enter a couple of times. Now I have an enable on here, and you see it went to the end of the rung, but now I have all of my different values. I can actually create an input and an input min max, output min max, and I can assign an output variable here as well. So now I could name this thing, and I could just call it something like scale 1, hit enter, and you see the type is already set up for linear transform. I can hit OK again, and then I can do the same thing with the rest of these variables. So wow, that's pretty strange. We can also do some other things here. We've got buttons right here for our rising edge and falling edge. So we already know our rising edge is this R trig. And if we hover back over here, that's what this is going to create. That's this rising edge detection. But of course it's called something different when you bring it into the environment. But as you can see, it is the exact same thing. Well, that would be an OSR, a one-shot rising. But then if we click over here on this one next to it, that's going to give us an F trig or falling trigger. That's going to be our OSF, our one-shot falling. So that's kind of, interesting. They're called something different in the menu than what you actually get. What is still the same is this last button right here is a TON. And I don't even have to explain to you how that works because you already know. One thing I will mention is when you're setting the time, you can either set a variable as your preset so that your program has control, or maybe your operator has control of that value, or you can just put in a static value using our time format. So if I want a 20-second timer, I just type T # 20S. And just like that, I've got a 20-second timer. So what else do you need to know about this environment? Well, here's something else that's kind of strange. If I come up here and go for a function block, let's look in the list and see if we can find comparators. I want a greater than, less than, equal to, and if I go through this list and read it, I'm not going to find anything. For instance, greater than, I come down here and I've got, gen, G-E-N, that's the only thing that I've got under G, so certainly nothing greater than. And you can see I don't have any symbols in here either. So how do I do greater than or equal to or something like that in this environment? Well, that's a funny thing. If I come up here to click on a block, I know there's not one, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and just create something and rename it. There actually are function blocks for those operations, and for a greater than, it would be GT. And there we go. We've got a greater than function block. But as you can see, it's only allowing us one place for an input. It's really, we can't see how to make this thing work. Well, if I click on the actual name of this thing, the GT, and if I pull up the help menu, you see here I've got an example in instruction list, I've got an example in structured text, and I have another example in function block diagrams. But I don't have an example of how this works in ladder because it doesn't. That's why it doesn't pop up in our menu whenever we're trying to define a function block. So we can delete that out of here because, get this, in ladder logic, there is not a way to perform that function. You can't do comparisons in ladder logic. So when they built this environment, they really wanted you to use ladders pretty much only for using relay logic. We can do something like a scale, and that's fine, but whenever we go to compare that value to something else, we don't really have a way to do it inside of ladder. So we're forced to use and rely on some other paradigms. Well, anyway, I wanted to show you that strange limitation. I mean, that's, something that you just can't really do practically in a ladder in this environment. Let me go ahead and move on and show you how to test your project for errors and also how to get the thing online and get it running. So I'm going to come over here and I'm just going to give this timer a name of Timey1. That's just fine. And now, how do I check and see if I've got some errors? Well, let me come up here to Project and click on Build, and as soon as I do, it runs a quick check and it tells me that I've got a warning, but nothing that would actually break my program. So I'm fine with that. And then, now I want to actually go ahead and run this thing. Well, in case we're not already there, we need to come up here online and make sure we're in simulation mode. Then we've got two buttons here, Log In and Log Out. Well, we want to click our login, you remember that, and now we're actually online with the processor. So now we'll click on Run, and just like that, we are running. So I've got my hold-in value right here, and let's check. Well, we're not actually running because we haven't made a call. So let's go ahead and stop and take this offline, and we need to put in an LD1 semicolon to tell the program to call this new routine that we've created. So with that, we can jump back into our ladder, go back online by logging back in and go back into run. Now this thing is running, and now I can actually change this value. So if I double click on false, I can actually change the value to true, but it doesn't happen immediately. I have to come up here to online and I have to tell it to write values, and that's going to actually send that new information that I've just created into the processor. There's a shortcut for that also, and you can see here it's Control F7. So I'll go ahead and hit Control F7, and as soon as I do, if I expand my time, I can see that now that's actually counting up. So now my program is online, I've tested it, I've made sure that it works, and we've got a little bit of familiarity with what's going on in the ladder environment here for the good and for the bad, because obviously we figured out that we can't do some basic things like comparisons in here. So that's okay. It's like I said, it's really going to force us to either create some of our own controls or rely on multiple paradigms when we're creating a program. At any rate, that's exactly what it's time for us to do. So let's go ahead and break here now that you've got some familiarity with this programming environment. I'm going to lay you out a homework assignment in the next lecture, something that can be done entirely inside of a ladder diagram. That's going to get your feet a little bit wetter with this, and then whenever we come back in the next lecture, I'll show you how I approach the same problem. So for that, we'll break, and I'll see you in the next.